So welcome everyone. Unfortunately, I cannot see all of you, but we're doing it online this year. But I'm excited for all of you to be here and to talk about an interesting topic, I think, strange clouds. I'm very much into cloud incident response, as you'll notice today. So excited to kick it off. My name is Korstiaan, and before we go into the details, I just wanted to quickly go over the reason for doing this talk, of course, and the research associated with it. I think it's always important to put it into perspective, of course. So we'll go for that first. So why this talk? So this is a nice little statistic on the Q1 of 2023 on the cloud infrastructure market. So everyone probably knows the big three, right? So we have Amazon with AWS, Microsoft with Azure and 365, and we have Google with its platforms as well, with Workspace and the cloud environment. So that makes up for about 65% of the global market for cloud infrastructure. That still leaves us with 35%, which is not too bad actually. So that's also one of the challenges that I have as incident responders is that I'm a consultant. So my clients, of course, expect me to know everything, and I should know everything about everything. And most of the research and the tools and the talks are always about the big three, right? So Amazon, Microsoft, and Google. So I decided this year to challenge myself a little bit and to spend a few months, I guess, working in the other clouds. And today I'm here to present my findings about it, and it's all done from an detection, response, and forensics point of view. So that's the sort of like the idea behind it, because simply there's not been a lot of research in this area so far. So what are the other clouds behind the big three? So this is one also from the Q1. So this is basically they split out this next 20 companies a little bit more. So we have Alibaba Cloud, IBM, Salesforce, Oracle, and Tencent. Together, this is 80% of the market, which is still leaves us with 20% of even smaller ones. But for today, this is sort of, we'll talk about the scope in a bit. This shows you some of the other clouds. And yeah, so I want to share that with you. Another interesting number that I found from a statistical point of view is that most organizations, and I've seen this in practice as well, is that they have more than one cloud provider. Sometimes they don't even know it because they might have a cloud platform where they do development, and then they'll have software as a service companies like Salesforce that run another cloud, which they're not really aware of. But this number goes to show that there's often companies with a lot of different cloud environments as well. And in general, we see the shift towards the cloud. Whether that's always the best idea, that's not for me to judge, but that's the reality. And as incident responders or forensicators or whatever you are, I mean, you're here, so you're probably interested in that side of the world. We need to understand a few things about these clouds. Right. So why am I the person to talk to you about this? As I mentioned, I'm an enthusiastic cloud incident responder, and I've been so for a while. I founded the company Invictus Incident Response. And with the company, we really try to specialize more and more in cloud incident response. This is sort of like, it is transitioning that way because of what we do in the market, etc. as well. But you still have your traditional ransomware stuff that we do, but more and more we see incidents in the cloud, which started with business email compromises in Microsoft 365 environments, but also more serious stuff that you also see in the media nowadays with APTs that are definitely targeting clouds, and they're probably already in a few of these cloud environments. And as Megan mentioned, I'm also privileged to teach the Forensics 509 course. So I hope to see some of you, if not all, at some point in my teaching career in the class, because it's a fantastic course and it's always a lot of fun. Before doing all this, I was working for other companies as an IR consultant. So very much consultant from an IR and forensics and IR enthusiast. Also with the company, I don't want to talk too much about it because that's not the purpose of this talk, but it will put it into perspective. I guess also why I'm here is what we're trying to do is we try to innovate and develop open source tools for the cloud. So hopefully some of you have seen some of these tools. They're all from my company, so to say. So we have something from Microsoft, from Google, and from AWS. Notably absent are the other clouds. So this is a gap that we also are sort of trying to address with this research. We're just trying to figure out what makes sense, because a lot of these tools are actually developed because we're doing an IR job and we notice like this is really hard, we should probably automate this, or it's difficult to get the logs, etc. So that's where we're coming from. So if you've not used any of our tools, please go ahead. They're all free of charge, no hidden things. You can do whatever you want, no weird licenses. You can do what you want with it. We also have some data sets. So if you are into detection engineering or training people, you can grab them. They have all kinds of weird activity in them. So good luck figuring that out. All right, let's dive into the actual research. So the approach for the research, just a few words on that. I started out basically what everyone does, I guess, is with new topics, Googling, and nowadays we use ChatGPT, OpenAI, all the good stuff, BART, even ResearchGate for proper research papers. And if you search for some of the cloud providers that we talk about today, from a forensics or IR perspective, there's 0 results. So there's not a lot available for us to work with. So the next step in my approach was, well, what do I want to know about the clouds to sort of be comfortable doing an IR engagement in them? So that's the requirements phase. When I've set that out, the next step was basically just register for the cloud with trial accounts, just use your credit card and just start working in it for a few months, and then sort of try to repeat what you're doing in other clouds when you have an IR investigation, just to learn from it and see the interesting stuff. So what is the scope? I went for Alibaba, IBM, and Oracle. Why? Because they are, of course, after the big 3. And I wanted to include Alibaba because it's the largest Chinese cloud, and that's always interesting. It's a large portion of the world that I'm from Europe, that we don't always see, and I think it's still super relevant to understand it a bit better. I did not use Salesforce, even though it was pretty high in the list, because it's more a software as a service platform and not an infrastructure or cloud provider where you can just buy all kinds of cloud services. So that's sort of the reasoning behind the scoping. Also, I don't have a lot of time. So if I talk fast, it's because there's a lot to put in a short talk. So I had to remove other clouds. I want to include Tencent as well, but yeah, maybe another time. If you're interested in this, just reach out to me and tell me you are, and then I'll maybe write a blog about it or something. So this is the scope of the research. So what did we find? We'll begin with the structure of our findings. So all different clouds, we have findings. And remember, we have a few requirements, so stuff we need to understand. I've sort of put it into 4 categories of findings. So first of all, when you're doing a cloud engagement or an IR, in the cloud, you need to understand something about the hierarchy of the cloud. So how is it structured? Are the resources all in one big umbrella, or do you have subsections? What are they called, etc., etc.? Why is that so important? Well, let's say you have an instance in a Microsoft Azure environment, and you have several subscriptions, or your client has several subscriptions. It might be possible that only one subscription has compromised resources, and that actor cannot use the identity to hop to other subscriptions. So understanding that and the hierarchy of the cloud is really important to also assess what's the scope and the extent of a compromise. So that's the first thing. Second, of course, logging. Cloud IR, there's a great blog by Chris Doman, who's also presenting today, about Cloud IR and is it the same as log analysis? Well, I urge you to read that blog, but a lot of the Cloud IR work is log analysis because we rely on the cloud provider to give us logs. So we need to understand what logs are available, but more importantly, what logs are by default available, because when we do engagements, it's often the client is not in the best state of security. So sometimes they have not the ultimate configuration. So we need to understand what do we have in the worst case scenario. Also, how can we export it out or acquire it? The third category of findings is about the security and the premium features. So is there something from the premium perspective that's worth maybe knowing or buying? So in Microsoft, we have E5, which is, it's very useful because it has additional audit logging that's really important for us to understand. Microsoft is hopefully and it seems that they're going to make it available to cheaper licenses as well. But those are the things that you want to know before you do an engagement in the cloud provider, of course. Also, security. Some instance start with a security product that triggers it, right? So maybe there's an alert in GuardDuty in AWS or in Sentinel Microsoft that triggers further investigation. So I'll also talk a little bit about security products in the cloud and how useful they are. Last but not least, this is the fun category. It's all the weird stuff that I found, I think, per cloud and stuff you probably want to know before you start working in that specific cloud. So without further ado, the first one is Alibaba Cloud. I had to insert a meme, I think, at least one, and I've chosen this one. If it looks like AWS, quacks like AWS, and swims like AWS, it might be Alibaba Cloud. It is a bit of a joke, of course, but Alibaba Cloud has taken a lot of, let's say, inspiration from AWS, as you'll see, or as you'll notice in my talk about Alibaba. It looks very similar, I would say, and some of the services are also very similar, which can be good news actually for us, but let's go into the details. So if you are doing stuff on Alibaba, you'll notice in a lot of the products or in the logging or in the domains that it has reference to AliYun, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, of course, and Ali Cloud. These are other names for that cloud provider. Again, it has a lot of similarities with Amazon AWS. It also actually as a company started as an e-commerce and now it's a cloud provider. If you look at the services and the graphics and the design, you'll see similarities, of course, as well. So in AWS, I made a few services. It's IAM for Identity and Access Management. In Alibaba, it's RAM. You have S3. In Alibaba, it's OSS. Interestingly enough, you cannot just copy-paste these services or change one letter because it gets interesting, because EC2 in AWS is, of course, the virtual machine offering. In Alibaba, it's called ECS. If you use ECS in AWS, it's very different. It's the container service offering. So be careful when you start mixing those services up. Last but not least, and we'll talk about this in more detail, is CloudTrail. It's not called CloudTrail in Alibaba, it's called ActionTrail. So that's an easy one to remember, I think. If you forget everything, ActionTrail is the thing to remember about Alibaba Cloud. Moving on, hierarchy. So the first topic. This looks also pretty similar to AWS, I must say. So you have accounts. Underneath an account, you'll have your resources. Every account also has its own root user and has IAM users, so normal users, and they call it RAM users. Remember, you can optionally structure your accounts in a folder. So maybe you want to have a department that has multiple accounts, maybe, yeah, developer department that has an acceptance production account, for instance. On top of it all, on the highest layer, you have the enterprise management account. So this is the root account of all root accounts, and this is similar to AWS. If you want to use, for instance, central billing and being able to have policies throughout your whole organization, you can use something called a resource directory service. This is exactly the same as what AWS does with an organization. You might want to use this if you have the option to enable this. For instance, you should use this because on this resource directory level, the highest level, if you enable this, you can set up your logging for all your sub accounts. So that's pretty cool. So that's hierarchy. Logging and acquisition. ActionTrail, as you mentioned, is the CloudTrail variant in Alibaba Cloud. It is on by default, which is amazing. It has 90 days of retention, which is also great. So if you go into any IR engagement in Alibaba Cloud right now, you will have 90 days of logging and it's on. You can count on that. If you want to store it in storage, in OSS it's called, or in their log service, you need to create a trail for it. All right. The SLA, meaning how long does it take between something happening and being recorded in the ActionTrail logs, is maximum 10 minutes, which is also very quick. So that's, I think, all good news. Something to consider is, this is different than AWS, it only records management events. So activity through the management pane, whatever that might be, maybe creation of a user, creation of a virtual machine, but not data events, which is, for instance, creation of an entry in a database product or storage being modified or deleted from an OSS bucket. You cannot enable it through Action Trail. You need to do it per resource or per service. So that's a little bit different than maybe what you're used to in AWS. Going a little bit deeper into the logging, now I'm in the GUI for the Action Trail. And similar to what you have at AWS Event History, you can live query and view the logs, which will be bound to the region that you're logging into. This is done with the event query, which is the basic querying function. So you can just see what happens. You can filter on the days and a few standard fields, very similar to AWS. If you click on View Event Details, you get a pop-up, or basically you see the event details. What I like about it is this little line. What Alibaba Cloud does is it sort of grabs a few important fields from the event and makes it into normal English. So here you see this event is an Alibaba Cloud account called root, which calls an API called getDefaultTrail, which belongs to the service Action Trail. So this is if you're newer to log analysis, maybe in this cloud, you get an ID in normal English what the event is about. It's pretty cool. The best part, I think, is the advanced query function in Alibaba Cloud. If you set up a trail, which I've done, it's called management events, you can, from the interface, directly query all the logs with the SQL query language. So that's pretty cool. And you can do all your advanced stuff that you normally maybe do in other products. You can do it right from the interface, and you can search and filter on every field that you want. It is pretty cool. I think this is a really neat feature. It only works if you have a trail enabled though. So you need to, at some point in your life, have enabled that Alibaba Cloud or Action Trail. Right, enough about the logs. Well, one more thing about the export. You can store it in a bucket, so you can grab it from the bucket and you can stream it to any other product. But I'm not going too much in detail because that's not really unique. This is just basic functionality that works well. So Alibaba Cloud from logging is fine. Security then. So they have something called Cloud Security Center. I think it's best compared to the Microsoft Defender offering, which is their large umbrella. You have multiple levels of licenses, and each one gives more services, so to say. Some highlights. What I really like is the access key leak detection service. So all the clouds do this a little bit, but they're not really transparent about it. Here you can enable it, and it will search GitHub and other repositories. It will crawl the internet to find your access keys, for instance, if they were accidentally leaked, which is one of the main points of entry still in the cloud. So it's a cool thing. Another thing, you can natively set up honeypots in the cloud. So you can just say, I want to have a honeypot database or a web server, and you can do it straight from the cloud without any third-party software. So that's cool. They also have something for log analysis. So all the security-related logs or your flow logs and maybe host logs from individual machines, you can all collect them with a built-in log analysis product, and you can query them. This is all part of Cloud Security Center. This is not free. You have to pay for it. Challenges. So interestingly enough, there's more than one Alibaba Cloud. There's also an Alibaba Cloud for mainland China users. Maybe someone of you will encounter it. I have not investigated that because I will need a China government issued ID, which I'm not going to get because that's not going to work for me. Sometimes it feels a bit buggy if you work with it for longer times. It gives you weird, sometimes an error, and then 5 minutes later you repeat it. It works. So far, I have good experience with support as well, so that's nice. Documentation, what is really cool is if you click on anything in the interface, for instance, if you click on this little eye, it will show the documentation as a pop-up in the browser, so to say, without you going to a new tab and going through the documentation. So that's very useful if you're just learning that cloud. If you're coming from AWS, you're going to love Alibaba Cloud. It is easy to transition and it's very similar to AWS. The second one, IBM Cloud, it's going to be interesting, this one. So it's IBM bought SoftLayer, which is a company that produced cloud infrastructure services, and they call it Bluemix. Now it's IBM Cloud. It is, with that name, the newest cloud. It's only since 2021. What I noticed, it is very much focused on financial services. It has all kinds of promotion and use cases for financial services clients, something to where you probably will then encounter it as well if you're an IR consultant. It does SAP in the cloud, for instance. What I must say is that it looks, from all the clouds I've seen, it looks the best. I've included a little screenshot for the people that have not seen it before. This is what you see when you log into IBM Cloud. So I think this looks pretty neat. So on the left-hand side, you can expand the servers, etc. But I like this view a lot. So I want to be positive about the cloud, because we're going a bit deeper in IBM Cloud, and it's not all sunshine. Let's keep it at that. The hierarchy. So on the highest level, we have the enterprise. It's like a tenant in Microsoft, so it's the highest layer. Underneath it, you have your accounts. Your accounts will hold your resources. If you want to combine accounts, you'll do that in an account group, ideally again for department and teams that have access to multiple accounts. Not that different than other clouds, just different naming, which is what you'll see throughout all clouds, I think. Logging, here's where it gets interesting, so buckle up. They have 3 offerings for logging. IBM Cloud Activity Tracker, which we'll cover today. They also have cloud monitoring, which is more for monitoring of individual instances and health-related stuff. Less for security, I would say, and for forensics. And they have IBM Log Analysis. This is more their central data lake solution, where you can send all your logs, whether it's security-related or application-related or custom logs. They all go into that log analysis product. We are going to talk about Cloud Activity Tracker. So when a user or a service makes the API call to the IBM Cloud service, whatever that service might be, it will be stored in auditing events. Through the IBM Cloud Activity Tracker service, you get a view on those auditing events, so you can interact with those events. You can do that through the GUI or API if you want to as well. But this is a bit different. Here's where it gets interesting. It is off by default. So if you have a new IBM Cloud, there is no audit logging. It is off. You need to enable it first. Also interesting, it's an American company, but they have sort of decided that their main region is going to be Frankfurt. So global events, those are mostly IAM events. So when you create a new user, a new group, etc., that will be IAM events. They will be recorded in the Frankfurt region. So if you are maybe a company in Australia and you have IBM Cloud, you do everything in your Sydney region, for instance, and you want to see your IAM events or other global events, you need to also enable Cloud Activity Tracker in that Frankfurt region. So keep that in mind. Otherwise, you might miss very interesting events, because IAM events are often nice from an instant perspective, of course. One other interesting thing I noticed, that by default on the free plan, if you enable it, it is basically a Linux tail command. I don't know if you know this command, but if you do tail, you can see the log live, so you can view what is happening in that log, or you can see the last part of the log. That is what it is as well. It's as a live view on the log. You cannot query it, you cannot interact with it basically, or you cannot build dashboards, etc. You cannot store it. Only when you go for a paid plan, you can store the data and start querying it. The most expensive paid plan, or the most complete one, only allows you to retain the data for 30 days, which I think is very short in this day and age. So I want to end on a positive note on the logging part. They do allow for dashboarding with Kibana, which is pretty nice. So, but keep this in mind, it's off by default and it has very little retention. So what is logged? Management events are logged again. Data events you need to enable just as Alibaba Cloud per service. The SLA, I have not been able to find what the exact time is that it takes between doing something and it ending up in the audit log, but it's from like testing live and doing it for a few weeks, it is pretty quick, but there's no limit that I have found, but maybe there is. And if there is, please share it with the rest of the group as well. One other thing that I don't like about IBM Cloud Logs or in Cloud Activity Tracker is that you can disable the log with exclusion rules. This is probably done if you have a very noisy service. You can disable the logs, but it's also very dangerous because attackers can abuse this, of course. The good news is that if you disable logs, it will generate an audit record saying that you've disabled it. But yeah, who's monitoring that stuff? Let's be honest. Like, we need to be very much on our game to see that activity. I would rather have it that it's not possible to disable standard auditing events. That's what I'm trying to say here. So what does the logging look like? So this is a typical view of logs. So you have the logs, which looks pretty standard, maybe a little bit like a syslog that you've seen before. So you have your log levels and you see here an event. So once we click on an event, and this is really nice, I think the view, the live view or any view of the logs looks great, I think. So you have your action, which is what happened. So a member was added to a group is what you can sort of grab from this event. Who did it? So who's the initiator of the action? So in this case, it's me. And in the bottom, you'll see the target. So what was this user added to? And then you can see that it's an access group. You'll see the CRN, which is the cloud resource name. So this is the unique identifier for the resource in the IBM Cloud. This is similar to what Amazon has with the ARN, so that you can use it to see what specifically this target or what the target is, basically. That is the log from a live view perspective. What else? Actually, I like something else. They have something called the context view in the Cloud Activity Tracker, where you can see events in its context. So what does it mean? So let's say an attacker gets access to an account and he adds 2 users to a group. And there's maybe 2 hours between them. You can then use the context view. Maybe you've identified one event. You can use the context view to see associated events with the first event you saw, to identify other events that are contextually close to this event. So maybe you want to see what other actions by the same source were performed, or maybe by what application, or maybe a combination of those. So this is the context view, and I actually hope that other cloud providers will start copying this a bit more, because this can be very useful in live scenarios, especially. So this is IBM Cloud Logging. If you want to export them out, it's very interesting. They have 2 APIs, version 1 and version 2. If you use the version 1 API, by default, that is the API that's used if you use the web interface, the GUI. You can export out 10K or 20K events, and you need to do it per region. If you do it via the API directly, you also have an export limit of 10,000 events, but you can script it with a loop that grabs 10,000 events per time through paging, and then you'll still get everything. So that's nice. From a security perspective, IBM offers the Cloud Security and Compliance Center, which is more a cloud security posture management tool than a detection tool. So it's not the best, I think, for detecting incidents, but it's more like preventing vulnerabilities and misconfigurations, which can be useful, but less from forensics perspective. So, things to remember about IBM Cloud: logging is off, limited retention. It's Frankfurt is the main region that you need to consider, even if you are in another continent, for IAM or other global events. It's very much AI focused. You see a lot of reference to Watson, which is, I think, their super machine or computer that also does AI. They do something with VMware, so you can bring your own forensics VM into the cloud, which is nice. Speeding up a little bit, I'll make the slides available to make sure that we cover all clouds. Last one is Oracle Cloud. It is interesting because it offers you a private cloud option where you can give Oracle Cloud physical access to your data center, and then you put their stack in your data center and spin up Oracle Cloud in your data center, which is, maybe there's a market for it, but I was pretty, I don't see that a lot, I would say. If you set up Oracle Cloud, very important, you can set your default region. So it's US East 1 in AWS, it's Frankfurt in IBM Cloud. In Oracle, you set it yourself. This will also be the main logging region. If you set it up once, you cannot change it to something else afterwards. So if you're doing an IR, you need to know what the main region is of your client, of course. Hierarchy, they use compartments instead of accounts. Same concept. You have a root compartment. In this case, it's Korstiaan, because you can see I have 4 subcompartments here. They are developer, finance, managed compartments for PaaS, and security. So that's the hierarchy in Oracle. You'll see they have the concepts in all the clouds are the same, but they have different naming. So account in Oracle Cloud is a compartment. Logging. You have 3 types of log in Oracle Cloud. You have audit logs, which are on by default, service logs, and custom logs. Service logs are individual Oracle Cloud services like compute that provide logging. You can have custom logs, is where you send your own logs to Oracle logging service. We are mainly interested in the audit logs. You can search the logs from the GUI directly, and you can do it cross-compartment, which is pretty cool. You can see it here. I'm searching through my audit logs. You can do basic and advanced searching in the console, so in the GUI, which is nice. The format of the logs is in JSON, which we'll see in a second. They have a lot of detail and they log a lot. It's like Big Brother. If you do a search in the GUI, it will log it. As you can see here, I've performed a search and it's logged as search logs, and it will contain additional details. So here we can see an example event. So we can see what the compartment ID is. This is a unique ID for the compartment that my account is in. I can see the event name, and underneath it, you have nested JSON records with all the details. So what does that look like? So just to summarize, it's on by default. Default retention is 30 days. It is all in UTC as well. So that is nice for us. We don't have to think about time zones anymore. Each event will have fields that are prefixed with event, which are basically the metadata of the event, like the time and the region. And then you have data fields, which have all the details. So those are the payloads of the event, so to say. One of those is the identity field, which contains my IP in case if I did a request, my credentials, how I authenticated for this specific event, which is very nice. So export, we can, I think I'm almost to my time, so I'll speed up a bit. Export is limited in the GUI via the API. It's very well done, and the logs or the references here, you can use them to build your own tools to grab the logs. There are very good examples in those links, so please follow them. Security, very limited, same as or as IBM, not detection focused, more CSPM. And 2 things, audit log report, which is great. If you are doing an IR and you know the account or you suspect an account, run an audit log report, and it's a big brother, and it will tell you everything that an account did in the last 14 days by specific event, which is really useful if you are suspecting a certain account of malicious usage or suspicious usage. So use that. If you do any search in your interface, it's only 14 days of logging that you can search through. Wrapping up, 35 minutes is not enough, as we noticed, but Alibaba, if you come from an AWS background, you're going to have a great time. It's pretty good from security and forensics perspective. IBM Cloud, the audit log is really important to enable, and Oracle Cloud audit log is great. Security, not so much. And we might need to build some additional tools in the future to grab all the logs for you guys.